The European Innovation Council and the European Institute of Innovation and Technology recently announced the winners of the 12th European Prize for Women Innovators, and today we have the privilege of having all three of them on the Sifted podcast. So first guest is Katerina Spranger. She's the founder and CEO of Oxford Heartbeat and the winner of the Women Innovators Prize. And her AI software lets surgeons rehearse brain stent procedures before they even touch a patient. And it has over 96.75 accuracy in clinical testing. She grew up in a small town in Ukraine, and her technology is now donated to hospitals back home, and she's doing incredible work there. Next guest is the wonderful Marta Oliveira. She's the co-founder and the CEO of Atmos Space Cargo and the winner of the Rising Innovators Prize. In April 2025, she flew Phoenix 1, which is Europe's first private orbital re-entry mission. And a year later, she's closed 25.7 million Series A with the EIC still backing her. And finally, we have Ella Cullen. She's the co-founder and CMO of Minespider and the winner of the EIT Women Leadership Prize. She is the marketer who ended up co-founding a blockchain mining company and building the digital battery passports that have become mandatory across the EU from February 2027. So Katerina, Marta, Ella, welcome. I want to start with Katerina. You've interviewed 34 surgeons across 9 months before you wrote a single line of production code. What did you learn from doing all of those interviews that you would have never been able to guess?
It was actually a fascinating experience to have gone through this. And I'm so glad that we took a year to do that research before building a product, to really truly understand what is needed in clinical practice and what actually to build. The first one is that surgeons are actually extremely open to innovation. I was a bit surprised because I was expecting some resistance, because these are physicians that have spent decades of their life, mastering their craft. And I thought they might be a bit protective about how they do things currently. But the opposite was true. And that really shows that they deeply care about improving their clinical practice. Very quickly in these conversations, I learned that it also requires an engineer to sit there and listen to their requests and their ideas and everything, because sometimes, they want everything to be solved right now. And you need to disentangle kind of as an engineer what is actually buildable currently with the current state of technology and what is science fiction. So that's why it's this collaboration between clinicians and engineers are so vital from the get-go, really. Another surprise was from witnessing actual procedures. I mean, surgeons are approaching the clinical practice as a form of art, which is, for me as a scientist, was an interesting observation to make. They are extremely comfortable making high stakes decisions based on their intuition and sort of pattern recognitions that they learn over the years. But what was really surprising is the creativity in which they, for example, find solutions to the shortcomings of the current state of the art in the technology. For example, one surgeon was using the tip of their catheter, which they knew the dimensions on, to deduce the dimensions of the blood vessels when they were inside the patient. So they're basically using that as a makeshift ruler, their own instruments, to then see, okay, what is the actual dimension? I mean, it is extremely creative and awe-inspiring, but also kind of heartbreaking, and shows you that the better tools are really needed. And maybe finally, what I learned is that surgeons, they carry an extreme emotional weight. And it's not to be underestimated how much they care about the patients. And hearing those stories also made me realize that what we were building or what we wanted to build at that time was not only a technology, but it's also something that really can give them a peace of mind and give them confidence to make those vital, critical life decisions for every single patient.
My follow-up question to that, on the basis of what you were saying in your last point, is what does it feel like the first time your software is used on a real patient?
That was quite something, actually. I remember it to this day. So it was a couple of years ago, and where Precise, our product, was used for the first time on a patient. This case was covered by the Times. I called myself personally the patient to obtain her consent to be featured in the Times. And I remember calling her, and all of a sudden, there was a real human on the other line, real human, whose surgery will be supported by what we have built. So that was already surreal. And then I saw her on the day of the procedure. I went to the hospital to observe, and I saw her being wheeled in, into the operating room, being prepared for the surgery. And then I saw our product being used on her brain. So that was a moment I will never forget, because until then, the work of an engineer is all about the data, accuracy, algorithms and stuff. It's all abstract, beautiful abstract. And then all of a sudden there is an actual human in front of you. And those medical scans that you work with, is a patient brain. And it's like, it just hits you. It's not like you don't know it, but when you see it, it's really unforgettable. And then all of the features that we've built, all of the buttons that we designed, all of the things that were sort of like on the whiteboard, we were thinking of what the user interface should be, what the color distribution, all of those decisions that we made suddenly became live and were used to support this vital decision on the patient's, surgery. I think I kind of see it in slow motion, frankly. And then you see the surgery go well. And then it's just become such an amazing, rewarding experience.
That's an incredible story. So Marta, you were a launch safety engineer for the James Webb launch. And I would love to understand what made you decide to walk away from spaceport to starting your own company.
So yeah, indeed, I was really lucky to get to work on the actual James Webb launch campaign. It was an incredible experience, and I actually got the message about the company idea from my co-founder right after that launch. And at the time, I was thinking of continuing to do Ariane 5 campaigns, eventually moving on to Ariane 6. But the idea was really exciting, not just economically, but also very sustainable. So at the time, the idea was very much focused on using inflatable atmospheric decelerators to do rocket stage reuse. So it was a much more sustainable way of doing it than, for instance, retropropulsion. And I was quite taken with the idea, but of course, I was going from something very stable to, no salary and, just a complete risk. And it was actually a very difficult path. For an entire year, we couldn't raise the seed round. But yeah, looking back, despite the difficulties, I think it was one of the best decisions I've ever made to co-found Atmos.
Amazing. I would love to also know about the day that Phoenix 1 flew. So walk us through that day. What did you feel when the trajectory change came through, weeks before your launch?
Yeah, well, that part was actually a bit terrifying. As you can, it was quite the change because instead of being off the coast of Madagascar, it was off the coast of Brazil. But even though it was terrifying, everyone moved very quickly into action. And that was really good to see the team like reacting very quickly. I was calling former colleagues to get extra coverage in Colombia and, just jumping into action and making sure it still, happened. And yeah, I think none of us will ever forget the day that, Phoenix 1 flew. We had 3 teams, one in 3 continents, actually. So a launch team in the US, a recovery team in Brazil, and us in mission control in Germany. And, getting the confirmation of the separation of the capsule and then actually getting telemetry data. I think we all had kind of a moment realizing like, wow, we're actually getting, data from our spacecraft. We actually gathered more than 100,000 telemetry data points that then are used to do the next generation vehicles and for the following missions.
I would love to understand, what does return from orbit unlock that people outside of space don't appreciate?
Well, actually, I think it's indeed very often overlooked because usually when talking about space, there's a big focus on launch. But it's actually through having that full logistics that you can really enable new markets. To give you a concrete example, if we look into protein crystals, they grow uniformly in microgravity when compared to how they are grown on Earth. And researchers have almost no opportunity to do their tests at the ISS. The frequency of flights is very low and it's very expensive, the price per kilogram. And if we want to enable researchers to better understand disease mechanisms or even improve drug development, we need to make sure that we have that return system. In Europe right now, there is no solution to make that happen. When you talk about being sovereign and having a full space infrastructure, you really need to have that return capacity.
Let's switch gears a little bit and popcorn to Ella. So Ella, you founded a blockchain mining company. So how did that happen?
Sure. So I was fascinated by blockchain. I had fallen down the rabbit hole in around 2016, 17. Started working on a few blockchain companies and flown to Ukraine for my first Ethereum conference. So I was enamored with the technology still as a marketer. And around that time, I met Nathan, my co-founder, who was working on a white paper basically hoping to eliminate conflict minerals from supply chains through the use of blockchain technology. So it's obviously a unique set of tools to help us bring greater transparency to supply chains where people don't trust each other, right? We have a lot of parties that don't trust each other. So the decentralized nature of blockchain could really help with that. And I realized very quickly this was such a fascinating use case, right? We don't have any or very little data about where the minerals in our phones come from, our laptops, our EVs. We have seen the news reports of slave labor and child labor and for instance, the DRC. So I was like, wow, this is really something I want to work on. And again, you don't have to have a STEM background to work in deep tech, right? We can all add our unique skills there. And so we went into this together, and I think it's actually really valuable to have a marketer on the team, because at the end of the day, a lot of technologists get very excited about their technology and they talk only about the Ethereum blockchain. But behind every client is a pain point, is a customer need, and we did a lot of surveys. We sat down with a lot of clients. I flew to Rwanda and spent a month there. I spent a month in Turkey with clients and in Uganda with clients, really understanding, okay, how do we get the minerals out the ground? How do we transfer them to a smelter? How do we make sure that product isn't laundered in at any stage of that? How do we track that effectively? How is it done now? Most of it's just done like written down or at most on a spreadsheet, So how do we make it easy for people to enter that information? So my role is really about how to improve not only the user experience, but how do we communicate data down the supply chain? And I think also second to that is understanding that we work with a lot of clients that are pioneers in their field and we want to tell their story. So I also saw my role as helping them to position their companies and products from a place of transparency, showing that they're good actors in the mining world.
And that's a very important point, actually. So minerals are fungible, and supply data is for a lot of companies the moat. So it's a secret. So how do you then make transparency something that companies want to share?
We're very fortunate. There are a lot of pioneers out there. And I say pioneers as like mining companies that want to do things differently and aren't afraid to show it. They're tired of greenwashing. They want to have verifiable sustainability claims, which is what we can do with our digital product passports and battery passports. So for instance, our client Mishra in Peru, the second largest tin producer in the world. So we track 10% of the world's tin from them. And Peru is known for having a lot of illegal mining. You have regions like Madre de Dios, which is really infamous for illegal, in particular, gold mining. And Mishra is, the opposite of that. They have insane health and safety standards. They have basically a whole community that they look after. They have a medical bus that literally drives around and looks after the indigenous community. So they have gone to great lengths to be as responsible and as sustainable as they possibly can be. And they wanted to work with us to highlight all those sustainability efforts in their digital product passports, which obviously are then tracked along with it and sold onto the world market. So I think it's transparency is a key differentiator. These days, more and more, actually, we also see it moving beyond simply, transparency for sustainability or for compliance as a competitive advantage. So the difference is there's a lot of junk data in the world, and our data is obviously verified. It's in a product passport. And now we see companies starting to want to use that data for AI, for better reporting, for better forecasting. They have a layer of data intelligence about not only their own internal company processes, but their products and their entire supply chains and operations. So we see this kind of shift towards them understanding that they can create competitive advantage by not only capturing this data in a verified way, but also then, applying AI tools to it.
So battery passports will become mandatory in EU soon. I would love to understand, what does it change for consumers?
Yeah, sure. So batteries are one of the most opaque things that we have in a car or in any device that we use. And this EU battery regulation will come into force in February next year. And it will require us to basically of course, there will be limited access to certain parts of the data, but we'll know more about the carbon footprint, recycled content, performance. I think it won't touch consumers until these basically, let's just take a Tesla as an example, until they reach the secondary market. So if I want to buy a Tesla from you these days, I kind of have to trust you and how much usage this Tesla has. And in future, we'll be able to scan a digital battery passport and have, for instance, dynamic data, which tells us exactly the state of charge and the state of health of that Tesla's battery. So we're actually improving secondary markets and secondary use cases for batteries, which obviously is also like energy storage systems and so forth. And the other key thing is that it won't only be consumers or humans reading this data, we'll also have a lot of AI agents working with this data. So reading these passports and making better decisions on repair or replace, which is a business model we've worked on with ABB, for instance, or, making more enhanced secondary markets, which is something we've built under the Recirculate grant. So I think there's going to be a broader range of applications of what we can do with this battery data.
And I can see huge amount of applications all across the board. One of the things when I was researching the three of you is the personal story, and that being a huge driver as to why you do the brilliant amount of work. Katerina, I would love to learn more about the Ukraine story. So you get to bring the incredible work you're doing at Oxford Heartbeat back to Ukraine's hospitals. What does it mean for you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, it's this one is very personal, of course. I'm Ukrainian and my family is still there. I grew up there, until the age of 17, lived there. And so what we did in Ukraine and what we are still doing is not some kind of a distant cause or sort of kind of charitable gesture. It's really deeply meaningful personally to me. It's a country at war and it's unsafe, frankly, anywhere in the country, extremely unpredictable. But in the middle of all of this, there are surgeons that show up every single day to the hospital to save patients' life. That doesn't stop. And when we made the decision to donate our technology Precise to Ukrainian hospitals, it felt like the most natural thing, and the least that we could do to support them. Healthcare workers there are really operating under unimaginable conditions. But nevertheless, healthcare workers show up and we thought that giving them the tools that we developed, it's not only, again, the least that we can do, but also as a way of saying, we support you, we are with you, we see you, and we think that you deserve the same level of technology than the rest of the world. After we did that, something happened that I didn't expect, which was that Ukrainian medical journal published an article about how Precise was used in one of the hospitals near the front line in Dnipro. And surgeon that the way he wrote the article that he then afterwards sent to us was that he went through every single patient and kind of describing their story there and how Precise was used to support their surgery and how it was helping. When I read, and the majority of those patients were wounded soldiers. When I read that article, it was extremely emotional. I cried, frankly. It really moved me deeply. And I thought it also made me realize that we are touching lives of people that we will never meet. And not only their life, but also the life of their loved ones, the life of their, family and friends, because the implication of someone, having a surgical complication is beyond only that individual, particularly if we're talking about brain surgery complications, strokes, the majority of them. The ripple effect of our work is, what kind of keeps us going through all the uncertainties and challenges that usually the healthcare companies encounter on their way.
Let's talk a little bit about medtech in general, actually. The timelines are brutal. So what kept you then going through CE marking and all the clinical trials?
Well, first of all, at the beginning, you completely underestimate all the timelines. I mean, we are on the market, but I don't think it takes twice as long as you think as a naive first-time founder, probably 3 times as long. Particularly in the deep tech, right? You don't have the certainty that it's even going to work from a technological point of view. I'm not even talking about all the market risks and et cetera. So you're absolutely right. MedTech is brutal. It's not for the faint-hearted. Innovating, particularly in the very clinical space, such as surgery, we are dealing with life and death of people on the table. So for me, through the dark times, I always kind of come back to the same place, which is patients. I myself went through a surgery, so I know how it is and how important that is and how those vital, seconds are going to define the rest of your life. And I feel also that every patient is really truly deserves to have the best possible chance. In surgery, things go wrong. No matter how much you plan, there is just the complexity is enormous. Human body is also complex. There are comorbidities of the patients, all of that. But if we can de-risk some parts of the surgery with technology, which is so powerful nowadays, and then also even more powerful technology that we can build ourselves, how is it that we're not doing that? So basically, I always come back to the patients. And if our timelines slip at the CE marking or clinical trial or whatever delay we have, the time doesn't stop for them. We want to really make it a global standard because we found out in our clinical trial, that previously every third patient received the wrong implant. which is unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And it's our mission to make it a standard of care that there is no more guesswork in surgery. So I always kind of come back to patient impact. Also in healthcare science, we love doing excellent work technologically, but we also grew to appreciate how important, even though difficult those medical standards are in terms of the validation, regulation, clinical trials, because they are the language clinical community understands to prove that your technology is actually safe to use. We went beyond what we actually needed to do from regulatory point of view. We didn't have to run our clinical trial, but we chose to do that because that gives us objective data that we can walk in any hospital in the world and say, we prove that this is safe to use, and this can be trusted. So we kind of in our field set the standard of how tools like ours need to be validated and what needs to be demonstrated. But also, of course, the validations, like coming back to EIC award, they're important. The journey is long, and sometimes you do need some, and it helps to have some moments to celebrate, like, our first. We had a BBC coming and record the live surgery in our patient number 4 in our clinical trial, or we had a publication in the most important journal in the field with our clinical study. And now the EIC award, like these things are really meaningful, and they also for the team, to keep going through this long journey, not a trivial one where we're paving the way. So all of that keeps us going. So thank you also to the EIC for that recognition.
When it comes to the EIC EIT, what I would also love to learn from you, Ella, what did the EIC EIT support give you at that stage, which any private investor simply wouldn't have been able to unlock for you?
I mean, they gave us time and they gave us opportunities to really validate. As Katerina says, you develop these concepts and then you don't actually know if they're going to work in the real world. So EIT funded our first project in Rwanda, which was called Ore Source, and this was tracking tin from a mine to smelter. And there is a system in place that does this, but it was increasingly corrupt, right? So our job was to basically test whether we could improve this process with our technology, and we did that with this first EIT funding and money. Then we were fortunate enough to get Horizon 2020 funding from EIC and then further funding from EIT. So these two have been there every step of our journey, also supporting us with network beyond the funding and introductions to investors and so forth. So they've been now some of our strongest partners throughout this journey.
That's wonderful. Marta, what has your experience been like?
Very similar to what Ella is describing. Actually, EIC Accelerator came at a time where we really needed the funding. So it's done in a 2-part. There's a grant, but there's also an equity part. So it also helped in closing the Series A. And it covered actually the development, not just of one mission, but of 2 versions of the Free Flyer. So the first prototype didn't have a propulsion system, but the second version, the next generation, has a propulsion system. So we do the deorbit maneuver ourselves. So we avoid, like what we were discussing before, any last-minute trajectory changes. We're in control for this next generation vehicle. Yeah, EIC actually, the grant covers Phoenix 2.1 and 2.2. So it was actually just essential to the survival and the progress of the company.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Was it the money that mattered the most? Was it something else, the network, the credibility, or even validation?
So this is the first time we received an award from EIC. And actually, at the same time, like 2 weeks later, we received the first EIT EIC grant as well. But we didn't know. So this will be our first experience in the next 2 years to experience the actually, support from European Innovation Council in terms of the grant. Already now, we also found out that there is support beyond the actual funding in terms of the business support and coaching and mentoring and probably investor introductions, as Marta and Ella shared. So looking forward to that and collaborating even more with EIC. That was hugely meaningful as well, because now we're also preparing for our very first fundraise. So the visibility and the recognition that we got from this also is extremely important because of the timing of this. Also, it's the first award on the European level for us. It's important as a UK company. We were previously, our grant funding came from local UK sources, Innovate UK primarily. This is the first time, we are kind of entering the European level, and it's so important and so exciting for us to kind of be part of that community.
It is indeed not just about the financial support. It's very much also a stamp of quality. I mean, in the space sector, sometimes, that can also be forgotten because people focus on the example of SpaceX, but actually SpaceX themselves had a lot of institutional support with the COTS program and CRS. And to actually become a global champion in space, you need to have that institutional support. So to have an organization like EIC give you a grant, it really confirms the value and the quality of what you're doing.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's, one of Europe's strong points, right? We're growing amazing startups. Okay, we perhaps have to work on the whole scaling of them. We know that we have a problem there, right? But I think it's such an incredible ecosystem to be part of. And it's only been constantly surprising for me, actually. I've been part of the EIC Women Leadership, the first cohort. That was also many years ago now, but that was incredible. I had 2 female mentors. I think that was the first time in my career that I had these incredible female mentors who I still speak to today. So there's this incredible ecosystem that actually I didn't know existed until we were inside of it.
Do you know any specific moment that you could share where you felt that that really changed the trajectory of what you were building because of EIC EIT specifically?
Like after the first flight, it's important, especially when you're talking about space hardware, to have a big project with a space agency or, with the European Commission. We actually had funding before from the European Commission for a different kind of inflatable atmospheric decelerator, so a more traditional type, so to say, that is inflated with nitrogen instead of having both nitrogen and an air breathing system. But having the EIC grant was really significant for continuing the development of what we had started. And just having that technological milestone, I don't think would have been enough. It was also important to show that we had that support from EIC, and both combined, as well as the development into military applications, I think made our case much stronger to actually survive as a company.
Yeah, I think it's on a similar level for us. I mean, one of our first pilots was with Mishra and Google, so Mishra being the Peruvian tin company. And we did a little pilot, to track tin from Peru to the US to a Google Pixel phone, and that went successfully. And then we got H2020 funding, and then we managed to, over the course of the next 3 years, roll out to be the largest traceability project in the world. So to track 30,000 tons of tin a year, to have we're still working with them to this day to basically make sure everything is fully integrated. So I think that being able to scale that project and have patient capital that could be with us every step of the way while we did something no one had ever done before was so incredibly valuable.
I would love to hear any one piece of advice that you would have for your younger self. So, Katerina, I would love to start with you.
I would say to myself, it's going to work out. Given all of the uncertainty on the journey, starting the company, there is so much uncertainty. And logically, it doesn't make any sense actually to do that. I don't know even what to say, kind of personality / mindset / naivety kind of to do that. But in my case, I had this huge pull to do it. I basically could not do it. There was no other way. I just needed to do it, even though I had no idea how to, whatever. But I, of course, given all of this uncertainty, previously I was in the academic background and where the path is clear, you go to school, you know what to do to succeed, you go to university, it's all clear, the modules have to do PhD, it's a bit more uncertainty, but still there are frameworks and you kind of know. And starting a company, there was just so much uncertainty that I faced that I didn't know how to deal with. And I was worrying a lot. And that kind of to deal with that uncertainty took some time to kind of learn the skill set and mindset, how to disentangle and sort of deal with it. So I would just, looking back, I didn't need to worry that much. It all worked out and it will work out in the future too. But if I could be less of a warrior and just have certainty that it's going to work out, and even if it doesn't, then you just learn so much. Then this is what I would say to myself.
What do you think, Marta? What's your one piece of wisdom?
I love Katerina's advice. I think I also definitely needed that advice, such as warrior myself. So, knowing that it's going to work out at the end and you don't have to be fully prepared. I think that's also important to keep in mind. I think I've had many moments of, doubting my choices. And even though I've always wanted to work in space and I actually made it happen, I also took some risky decisions, like not going to ESTE, going to French Guiana to work on the launch campaigns, and then to, co-found the companies. So to just, kind of accept that you don't always have to be ready. And I'm going to steal Katerina's advice there, that it will work out at the end.
I love that. Well, I see that we have a similar entrepreneurial experience, and you'll lose a client, you'll gain a client, you'll have issues, and then you'll have wins. And I think as you become more, let's say, seasoned, you get used to riding those waves. But at the start, it is definitely stressful. But it is also so deeply rewarding. They can learn and figure it out along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing. Katerina, Marta, Ella, it's been wonderful chatting with you today and getting to know more about your story. And I'm sure whoever's watching this will also feel the same way.